Hello, you're listening to Do Yourself a Favour, the podcast about learning from experience and the things we do to make our lives easier. My name's Tim Sisney from Make Work Work Better, and each episode I'll be talking to my guests about their epiphanies, their inspirations, and the magic of their workflow. And I'm joined on this episode by Alice Ter Haar, Badass Unicorn. Hello, Alice.
Hello, hello.
I'm really excited to have Alice on the show. Alice was one of the first people I asked if she would join back when Do Yourself a Favour was a very, very small, not quite worked out what it looked like idea yet. So really pleased we could make this work. Alice, would you like to tell everybody who you are and what you're...
Sure thing, I will. So my name is Alice Ter Haar, and I run a personal development bespoke boutique, all those fancy words, personal development consultancy that is called Badass Unicorn. So I specialise in helping to ignite people's potential, and that mainly takes the form of workshops that I run with corporate clients like Ocado and Gusto, and I also run some public training programs and do a tiny bit of one-to-one coaching on the side.
Fantastic. And I've got to ask about your company name. So tell us about the Badass Unicorn.
So Badass Unicorn was basically a Frankenstein idea. When I worked at Deliveroo, where I was for 4 years, I left there in May of last year. People kept asking me to talk about this super cool, fast growing UK tech success story. And I loved public speaking. And so I was more than happy to get up on the stage and share about things, but I didn't want to talk about Deliveroo's marketing strategy at the time. I was in the marketing team, or the growth strategy. And so I wanted to talk about personal development. So I basically created this monster of, okay, what can we learn from companies like Deliveroo about growth, and how can we apply that growth and those learnings to ourselves so that we can kind of emulate their success? And I did it for the first time at a conference back in, must have been 2018, and it really bit, and people seem to quite like this concept and this idea of how can we learn from these super cool, innovative, disruptive, fast-growing businesses. So I continued kind of talking on panels and conferences and podcasts and anyone that would have me. And at that time, I was doing this personal development thing as a side hustle alongside my full-time gig in the marketing team at Deliveroo. And basically this name, Badass Unicorn, that I'd called the presentation just sort of stuck. And so I went from having my website being www.aliceterhaar.com and decided that I thought, okay, well, let's call it Badass Unicorn and see where that goes. And here we are now, 3.5 years later, and it's my company name.
Nice. I like when something becomes almost accidental and becomes a little bit of a kind of hangover, and it's just like, that's going to, so Make Work Work Better was actually my last corporate team. That was like, we decided it was the purpose of the team, and we had that on our huddle board. And I love the fact that somewhere in London Bridge, there is a very disused and probably like permanently scarred whiteboard that has Make Work Work Better still written on it. But it was kind of like, I wasn't really ready to let that go. You know, that still felt like it had some mileage in it. So it's, yeah.
And there'll be tons of those things that don't stick, right? Tons of those ideas that don't materialize, or they kind of fall by the wayside. But then there are some of those ones that have that spark and that longevity, and you're not sure which ones they're going to be necessarily at the beginning, but they always kind of find their way through in the end, I think.
Yeah. And yeah, there's always a lot of things that come out as being like bad indie band names that you kind of like could forget about quite happily, and before you land on the one.
Yeah, well, you know, it could have been, I could have told you the story that it was one of those porn star generator names where I, you know, picked the first letter of your dad's maiden name and this, that, and the other, and it come together. But it's not quite as random as that.
So, Do Yourself a Favour, which was also actually something that I had the name for way before I had the concept of the podcast. It's like, so that was what my podcast was going to be called. I don't know what it's about yet. It's all about learning from experience and the things that make our lives easier. So I'd like to kick us off by telling us about something that you wish you'd learnt earlier.
It's a big old question, isn't it? And it's something I'm going to share now that I haven't even mastered or completely learned yet, but it's something that I think I'm on a journey to continuing to try and reinforce in my head, which is caring less about what other people think about me. So I don't know about you, Tim, but I'm one of those people that can torture myself about people laughing at me behind my back, or thinking that that video that I just posted on LinkedIn is cringe, and worrying about the stupid thing that I said in a meeting, or the fact that I've got a massive spot and I'm trying to cover it up. I spent a lot of my 20s, and I don't want to be like, oh, I'm 33 and I've got it all figured out, because I really don't. I'm still struggling with this thing, but caring a lot. And then I had this situation when I was at Deliveroo where I sort of was essentially demoted. I was leading marketing for a region, and then they needed a director of marketing, they said, to kind of take over the role, and I just wasn't quite ready for it. And at that point, I'd never been quite so embarrassed professionally in my life before. And I think then it was like, really, okay, now I'm really worried about what people think of me. But I don't know, maybe that like hitting rock bottom and being really embarrassed and really having something to care about, because let's be honest, it was a bit of a kick in the face, right? I think I kind of emerged from that a little bit freer to be like, okay, basically one of the worst things that I could have ever imagined happening, I mean, in the context of worst things, right? But pretty big career crisis has happened. How much worse can it get? So does it really matter if I put a video on LinkedIn, or if I speak at this presentation, or somebody says no to the business development pitch that I put forward? Well, probably not. So I dare say I haven't mastered the act of not caring about what other people think, but I have certainly come a long way in not letting it stop me from doing things anymore.
Is there anything that you didn't do before you'd kind of had that realization, where you realize now that actually if you'd learned that lesson sooner, you'd have done something differently?
Is there anything that I didn't do? I've always been quite a bullshit type of girl. I always had a bit of gumption about me. So I think I would typically continue putting myself out there. But I can see people that I work with, in particular, people who do my courses, let these things stop them from doing things. So stop them from putting that post on LinkedIn, stop them from asking for that promotion, stop them from submitting that new business proposal, stop them from launching that free workshop that they think about doing, because they're so worried about what other people might think. What if it doesn't work? How embarrassing. I'm going to look like I'm trying really hard. So I think for me, it was more a case of I would do these things, but I would have the inner critic, the internal monologue, the shitty committee, whatever you want to call it, just giving me a hard time all the time. But fortunately for me, I think I had the self-confidence to persevere through it. What I've learned about myself since, and I give a workshop on how to have confidence, is that while I have quite a lot of self-confidence, trust in my abilities, the reason that the inner critic is going so much is because actually my self-esteem is something that I need to work on. So my sense of self-worth and actually liking who I am. So it was like, I do these things, but I kind of hate myself for it, because I think, oh God, what a show off. Who does she think she is? Putting her head above the parapet, etc., etc., etc. So does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, no, I recognize some of it actually. There's certainly parts of my corporate career where, and for me, it was always where I had put where there were maybe certain people in the organization who I'd kind of hung, my next step or my future or whatever it is depends on what that person thinks of me. And I kind of put that person in a particular kind of place. And then I'd be just dissecting, every conversation I had with that person. I'd then walk away going, oh, I can't believe I said such and such. And it just felt kind of like, and they weren't thinking anything else of it. They got their coffee quite happily and wandered back to their desk to think about something more important. But it can really it's incredibly distracting and can absolutely send you into a tailspin if your headspace isn't.
Yeah. So there's this concept called spotlight syndrome. So we're all so self-involved that we think people care about our spot, or the stupid thing that we said in a meeting, or what we said over the coffee machine. But the reality is, whoever you were talking to, whoever's doing whatever they're doing, is more concerned with their giant spot, their screw-ups in the meeting, their stupid thing that they said, that they don't even have the time to worry too much about your trials and tribulations because they're too focused on their own. So we get our knickers in a twist and make mountains out of molehills about these relatively small things, when for the next person, it didn't even compute.
Yeah. There was, I forget where it was now, but I remember seeing a talk and the presenter said that they always think of their internal monologue as being a duck, because it's really difficult to take a duck seriously. And I quite like that, just like imagining, for some reason, when I think about that, the duck's wearing a hat and smoking a cigar. But yeah, I quite try and do that as much as possible, is kind of imagine that my inner critic is just...
Yeah, you could do that. Some people give them a name. So I saw there's a guy called Steve Chapman, I think, who talks about drawing your inner critic and really visualizing that thing and that person to almost make it real, but also disassociate it from you, because that inner critic isn't you. It's a part of you that's almost like looking down in the third person, isn't it?
Yeah. Our brains are extremely unhelpful a lot of the time, aren't they?
This magnificent machine is flawed. Yeah,
100%. So thinking about journey and thinking about the way that you moved through your career, and now you're on this personal development journey and this mission to bring personal development to other people. What was I often ask a book, but sometimes it could be a concept. What was something that kind of changed your direction, or changed the way that you went about things?
Yeah, so I mean, that segues nicely for what we were kind of talking about before. And I dare say there's probably going to be a bit of a theme to this episode, I feel like, where it's about sort of mindset and resilience and all of those things. But there are kind of two concepts, and they are pretty similar, although they are different, but they represent the same thing, really. And it is about the inner voice, the inner monologue. So the first personal development book I ever read was The Chimp Paradox. Have you read it?
Great book. Yeah, great book.
Absolutely amazing. I always recommend to people to listen to it, because Professor Stephen Peters, who wrote it, A, has an amazing Geordie accent, and it's just a really nice listen. And B, I personally find audiobooks much easier to digest for personal development than reading them. Otherwise, I find them a bit dense, whereas I kind of enjoy them a lot more when I listen to them. Plus, you could go for a workout or have a walk or cook dinner while you're listening. So from a productivity point of view, win-win. But I remember listening to that book and really starting to identify these different voices in my head in a way that I never had before, and realizing that negative voice that got FOMO and road rage and was very emotional and irrational and unreasonable and reactive was a part of me. And in the book, it's called The Chimp. But that when I could recognize that voice, listen to when it started to hijack me, have a more constructive dialogue with it, I could then make different decisions, try and change my viewpoint, take different future steps, all because I didn't let that voice take over, which probably prior to reading the book, I would have been more ruled by the shitty committee or the inner monologue than I am now. So there was that concept, which kind of maps to growth mindset, fixed mindset. So for anybody that hasn't come across those terms, fixed mindset being the idea that we have a finite amount of intelligence or capability that we can't grow. Whereas a growth mindset is all about the fact that we are evolving individuals who can develop and learn and become more expert at something. And it's kind of like a positive negative lens, in the same way that the chimp is normally a bit more negative and the human, which is the other side of us, is a bit more positive. And again, just like with the chimp, you can catch yourself when you go into these different mindsets. So a fixed mindset being, oh, I've just run a course, I've had not as many signups as I wanted, what's the bloody point, I'm not going to do that again, I'm a failure, it's all useless. Whereas a growth mindset person would go, I learned lots in the process, I still delivered tons of good value, what can I take from the learnings to apply next time so that I can have more success? This is all part of the journey. And so it's really this concept of which voice do you listen to, And it's natural for us to have fixed mindset moments or chimp days and to lose our cool sometimes. But it's about how do we talk back to ourselves once we've had one of those moments in order to be in a more productive and constructive place afterwards.
There's something, what I loved about Chimp Paradox is that I think it's the root of so many things that in the personal development space or in the productivity space or we see it a lot in sort of process, right down to process improvement and like teamwork and things like that, where actually there's that, it's the difference between like responding and reacting and being able to take out the, engaging your grown-up brain before you react with your chimp brain. And I find it fascinating how many of the things how many of the different books or different approaches or different methods that are out there essentially come down to managing these two parts of our brain that have evolved at different times to perform different functions and who haven't really worked out how to get on yet.
Yeah, exactly. You've got systems 1, systems 2, you've got the inner child, you've got lots of different manifestations of this core concept. And exactly, as you said, the chimp particularly we're programmed to think like this. And the reason that we're programmed to think like this is basically to keep us alive. The chimp came into existence 70,000 years ago when we were on the savannas and, evolving from our ancestors to warn us about the fact that there was a massive saber-toothed tiger coming along and that we needed to either run or freeze, right? And these systems have been put in place in order for us to recognize those things. But actually, I don't know if you've read the book Sapiens, but the human species has evolved not very much in 70,000 years, physically, functionally, biologically, physiologically, considering how freaking different our lives look from 70,000 years ago. And so we're still operating on this quite almost outdated iOS operating system that is programmed for a different time. And so now, rather than being fearful about the saber-toothed tiger, we're fearful about redundancies, demotions, and all of the other things. But there are also things like fear of missing out is quite a natural thing for us to feel when we have evolved from chimps. We have a pack mentality. We don't want to get left behind, because if you get left behind, you might die and you don't have all of the things that you get when you're part of your pack. So lots of the things that we respond to with the chimp are very natural, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a blunt instrument and it can't be something that we challenge to make more useful for ourselves and live happier, more fulfilled, less ego-driven lives, right?
I think also the part that plays in bias and, the topic of unconscious bias and looking at the way that we make judgments about people or we make judgments about situations all kind of comes back to the same thing, doesn't it? Just like helping us make faster decisions at a time when we feel like it's, and it all stems, as you say, from a point where actually things were going to eat you, as opposed to, maybe just like give you a bit of a side eye and lunch queue, so.
Yeah, exactly. How does the chimp come across in sort of like productivity and process world?
In productivity, it very much comes down to that sense of reacting. So like latest and loudest, that email comes in from that person and it immediately derails your day type thing. So you can find it in that sense of being able to like disconnect the doing of your work from the kind of arrival of your work, if you like. So the point at which it arrives in your world and you have all the emotional reaction to it, if you can have a process of allowing yourself to then bring in your grown-up brain and work out actually what is this thing and what do I need to do about it, as opposed to it just sitting in your inbox staring at you and freaking you out, then actually being able to build that into your system is hugely helpful for not finding yourself overwhelmed by just, I've got all these things to do and I don't know which one to do first. And it's because everybody thinks that their email is the most important, but you're the one who's going to do it. So you have to make good decisions about it. Making good decisions is tiring. So you should try and do it at a point where you're not already kind of like amped up on dopamine and your brain's like screaming at you. So from one perspective is that there's also a bit of a sense in process improvement and change that it's that suspicion of change. It's that idea that when we've been doing things the same way for a long time, there must be a reason that we're doing things the same way for a long time. People tend to clam up and become quite defensive or protective if they think that there is the chance that something might change that would make things different. Even if that change is going to be positive for them in the long run, the fact it introduces something that they don't understand immediately starts triggering people's chimps. So then being able to address, like, acknowledge it, but, you know, and sometimes it's kind of useful to let the chimps out a little bit and just get them to, you know, do a bit of work, because, you know, they've got opposable thumbs, they could get involved. And then, and you know, and again, just give the time for like the grown-up brain to kick in and actually go, well, you know, maybe if we did this differently, or maybe we did this differently. So yeah, it's that initial response to a perceived threat, I think, in all occasions, which just stops our brains from functioning in any kind of helpful way.
Yeah, it sounds like you can definitely hear, as you talk about the change thing, the fixed mindset coming in of, well, this is the way that we've always done it, and I don't want to take any risks because what if that exposes me? And the threateningness of change is a very kind of natural sometimes, but fixed mindset kind of point of view. And I remember watching a YouTube video about how to move people through a change process. And there is actually a lot of value in the people that are perhaps loudly, not contradictory, but they have a lot of strong opinions and they're not necessarily positive about the change, because at least they're engaged. It's the people that are like completely disengaged, are completely apathetic to what's going on, that perhaps is a little bit less easy. Yes, they're not being loud and getting people to come out with sticks saying, we don't want to do this. But at least the people who are impassioned have some feeling towards whatever you're doing. And hopefully you can then sort of change it in some way to be a little bit more conducive to what you need them to be feeling.
Absolutely. They might be right. You know, there could be an element of what they're saying which is actually right and needs to be factored in and taken into account. And I think often the assumption is that people who are resistant to change are just like old-fashioned dinosaurs, but actually maybe there's something that they understand about the situation that the people who are responsible for change haven't fully understood. So I think it's important to bear that in mind as well.
Yeah, totally.
So we're moving into the kind of recommendation section. This is where we get a little bit of a lifting the lid on your workflow and how you go about doing things. And so I'd like you to tell us about something that you can't live without, a tool or an object or a process or whatever it is that you use every day, absolutely couldn't live without, be lost.
So I have one that I use every day, every week. It's probably like productivity 101. So I'm kind of intrigued. What do you think of Eisenhower's prioritization matrix?
I think it's useful as a triage mechanism. I think there's an awful lot of stuff in your life that, like, I'm not entirely sure where I would put the lime descaler under my sink. I need to have there and, you know, use every now and again. And if I don't use it, you know, everything's going to get all limey. I don't think it falls into any of the buckets.
I put that in non-urgent, non-important, but I see what you mean. It's obviously a bit of a blunt instrument. I use that non-urgent, non-important as a little bit of a catch-all. It's almost like things that I need to remember. And I know some people treat that list as, right, get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because you have to adapt all these models to be useful for you, right? So for me, the way that I use the prioritization matrix, and you're right, I used to use it for triage exactly then. And I used to find it so helpful to use for triage.
Would you like to explain a little bit about the Eisenhower Matrix for anyone who hasn't come across?
Yeah, absolutely. I was assuming that everybody that listened to this podcast would be productivity, like, aficionados, but the Eisenhower's prioritization matrix is essentially thinking about your tasks and splitting them into sort of 4 segments. So you've got your urgent and important tasks, you've got your urgent and non-important tasks, your non-urgent and important tasks, and then your non-urgent and non-important tasks. So in theory, what you would do is you'd work your way through the urgent tasks sort of first, they're higher priority. Typically for me, the things that go in urgent and important are the things that need to be done today or tomorrow, but they're also the things that are going to move the needle, or they're things that are related to money, like get that invoice to the client, because I think that you need to be prioritizing those things, right? Follow the money. The things that probably sit in my non-urgent but important, my urgent but non-important tasks. Maybe we can link to the matrix in the show notes so people can actually see what we're talking about. Would be things like, you know, booking that train ticket or collecting those workbooks for the client. And people often ask me, oh, well, if it's urgent, then surely it's important. But it's more the like bitty things going to move the needle, but have some kind of immediacy that you need to see to. And then you've got your longer list in your non-urgent but important. And a lot of people say to delegate these tasks. So maybe you put some time in your diary to do them for later on that week or next week or whenever it might be. These are the things that are going to move the needle, but they don't have to be done today or tomorrow. They can wait. And then the other one is sort of a catch-all where you'd pick up dishwasher salt and hear back from X client that has a proposal sent to them, those types of things. So yeah, I use that every week when I'm planning my week. And I know some people use it, as you say, more as a triage, but for me, it's just a helpful framework for me to know, like, what do I need to start with? And sort of towards the back end of the week, hopefully you can tick off a few of those non-urgent but important tasks that are on your list.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where it could be, it's incredibly effective when people are really first starting to try and get their hands around everything that they've got in front of them. Actually, just those 4 buckets and be able to go, actually, these are the things that I need to really concentrate on now. If you're overwhelmed, being able to put those things into buckets like that is hugely helpful. And I'm very much with you that if that's the approach you're going to make, then I don't think you can do what a lot of the kind of popular versions of that matrix that you see posted on LinkedIn say, just like one of them you just ignore, you know, because those non-important, those non-important, non-urgent tasks, if you ignore them, at some point are going to possibly become important or urgent. You know, if you don't do the basic if you don't brush your teeth, you know, that's the act of brushing one's teeth feels neither important nor urgent, but it's going to become fairly urgent and important if you continue to not do it. And so I think, you have to treat even those non-important, non-urgent aspects with a bit of respect, I think.
Yeah. And it's with all these things, with all these models, it's about treating them with a pinch of salt and making them useful for you and applying them for yourself. And I found it to be quite a useful framework to just kind of get my head in gear and to process what I need to do and when, and also give myself permission to not panic about some of the things that are on the non-urgent, non-important list, but know that I'm not going to forget them. Like I used to use Trello, and I actually kind of had the Eisenhower buckets on Trello, and then I'd also have just a catch-all for. And I've moved between these because sometimes I like having the Trello board because you can just easily move stuff across. But there's something for me with the act of crossing things off and rewriting them that just keeps this stuff top of mind, as opposed to you just have this list of stuff that never moves anywhere because you're not reminded each week, oh, I'm writing out, book this thing again. And then asking yourself, all right, does this really need to be on the list? Like, if I don't buy dishwasher salt, is the dishwasher going to break, or will my stuff just be a little bit streaky?
Yeah, I think there's definitely that. I mean, one of the things that I really like about the getting things done weekly review, which is a step in, and it is a similar kind of idea of every week you look at everything you've got on, and there's always a question there for me is, if I've not moved on this thing, am I actually going to do it? You know, why is it on my list in the first place? And sometimes it's just like, I ended up on a list because it felt like a good idea at the time, but maybe it needs moving onto a, someday maybe list, or maybe it's just like, actually forget about it. You're never going to get around to doing it, and that's okay.
Yeah. The later base, I call it.
Oh, nice. I like that. So what's the most recent shiny thing that's come into your world? What's the most recent toy or tool or habit that you've adopted that you've really seen some benefit from?
So this is quite a specific one for me and with what I do. But I bought a platform called Kartra. And Kartra is a sort of all-in-one marketing platform. So it does your CRM emails, it can host your website, you can do digital advertising through it, you can host products on it. And I'm probably only using about 15% of its functionality now. But the intention is that I'm going to use a lot more of it. But the really useful thing is that when you do what I do, and you have like a CRM list and you're posting videos and you need to host them somewhere and you're running courses and blah, 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 you have lots of things happening in different places. So I had MailChimp posting my emails, and then they'd sign up through a Google form, and then that Google form, and then I tried using Zapier, but for love nor money, I couldn't get those zaps to zap and do the right things, probably because I'm not particularly tech savvy, but I'm also not completely incompetent at it either. But I ended up deciding, right, I'm going to go for the all-in-one solution that is built for people that do what I do, running courses, building kind of like a thought leadership product, where it's all been thought through. And when that person signs up, they're tagged to that list, and then that talks to the CRM system, and then they get sent that automated email, and then they get put onto that sequence to drive like getting to know me or whatever, right? And like I said, I haven't used anywhere near the functionality that it has, and it was quite expensive. But even what I've done so far, like the time that I've kind of saved from having all these different systems and having it in one place that sort of talks to each other has been really useful. So yeah, a really shiny bit of tech. And it's not flawless, because whenever you have these programs that you haven't built yourself, you're having to work within somebody else's framework, and you're like, why won't you just do what I'm asking you to do? Like, what's wrong with it? And it's always something that you haven't appreciated because the system isn't set up to be bespoke to whatever you want to do. But it's pretty helpful nonetheless.
Cool. I think there's something about what you just described there, which I've found as I've been sort of getting into running my own business, that you can start by using this tool over here, and there's a free version of that tool, so you can grab that, and it's got some limitations, but you can work around those for the time being. And then there's this other thing that you could use that will do that job, and they don't really talk to each other particularly well, but you've not got that many people to copy and paste over each week, so it doesn't actually make a big difference. And you can probably manage with cobbling together 2 or 3 different platforms, and then it does reach a point where it's kind of it's a false economy. What you've saved from using these different the different versions of these different tools ends up being the effort to pull them all together, or the kind of like invisible internet string that holds all of these things together. Like, it breaks one day and suddenly you don't know what's going on with it. And increasingly I can see how platforms that are designed to work together, when you really want to be spending your time talking to clients and doing the thing that you love and not trying to fix an email list, I can see the attraction of that, and I can see why there is such a bewildering array of those tools on the market, because I think you can Heath Robinson it up to a point, and actually I think the likelihood of Heath Robinsoning it is higher if you are a bit techie, because you kind of think, oh, I could do that, I could knock that together with some Excel automations. But actually, end of the day, it's just you're not getting paid for that work.
Yeah, I never heard of Heath Robinsoning it. What's that?
Heath Robinson was I think he was an artist or a cartoonist or something, and he basically drew really overly complicated inventions. So it's kind of linked to often, yeah. So kind of the idea of an extremely complicated invention that's been made out of things that aren't really designed to all work together. I've got a picture of a boat. The picture I've got in my head is a boat that's got like wheels, so it basically drives along the bottom of the sea. There's a boat on the top, and the wheels kind of telescope. But yes, it's fine. Reasonably esoteric reference. Sorry about that.
No, and you're right. And I think that the reality is, at the beginning, use all the free stuff. I mean, maybe some people go and sign up and buy all the products before they've even got going. But I think you should be making some money before you want to be investing in all of this techie stuff. And MailChimp is free up to 2,000 people. And you can get some pretty okay website platforms. I was using Squarespace, still using Squarespace, and it's not very expensive at all. You can do a lot for free or for relatively low cost. And I think you should do that before you're making proper money. But you're right, it then comes a point where it's a false economy. And one of the growth pains that I'm going through now is I have quite a lot of anxiety about money because of my childhood. And so I'm always quite scared about spending money. And what that looks like is me being nervous about investing in my business. Mm-hmm. So I spend time doing stuff that, to be honest, I should be getting somebody to help me with, right? There's probably like a week's worth of work that I still do, that if I was being charged out to a client for that, or if I was creating a new product, or if I was generating more content to reach my audience and increasing my reach, might actually see more financial returns for me than writing the feedback report, scheduling meetings in my diary, proofreading a CRM email. And so I'm in this place of like having to kind of force myself to start investing in the things that I need to stop hampering how much I can grow because I don't have enough hours in the day and I'm not using those hours most productively. But it's easier said than done when you're always worried about, well, okay, I'm doing fine now, but what if I don't have any paid workshops, or what if nobody signs up, or, you know, all of those things. So yeah, it's definitely something that I'm kind of, I'm pushing myself towards and trying to be a bit braver and a bit more risk taking, because I know that I'm probably stopping my growth just because I'm a bit scared to spend the money.
I can see. Yeah, there's a point where essentially it's a leveling up, isn't it? And
exactly.
And you have to do that in your head as much as you do with, you know, with anything else that you get. You've got to actually accept, okay, I'm taking this to a different level now. I'm going to have to let go of some stuff. I'm going to have to trust somebody else to do some things.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to have to, and the benefit is, in theory, you get really useful hours back where you're going to be able to make more money, or you're going to be able to create more impact. But in order to give yourself back that time, you have to find a way to do it elsewhere. And that sometimes means paying. Yeah. You can't just get more efficient at some of those things. They just like, they just is amount of time that they take. And you can, I'm sure you're really good at automating this and doing that and making things as like smooth as they can. But there's also just a volume game too.
Yeah. There's one of the mantras that I often come back to is, you know, there's no sense doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. And, you know, there's going to be a point where you could spend an awful lot of time trying to come up with a really slick way of doing something that probably you shouldn't be doing. And
exactly,
you know, yeah. So we're into the home stretch now, Alice, and I would like you to complete the sentence. Do yourself a favor and...
Well, this is a little bit personal development, empowerment meme, but I think fundamentally do yourself a favor and take initiative to go after the things that you want. And I think there are a lot of people that have a lot of dreams, that have a lot of capability, that have amazing stories to tell, who think, oh no, I can't do that. No, I won't be able to succeed, or they kind of settle. And that's also okay, because not everybody needs to be being a badass unicorn, striving and pushing themselves and whatever, because everybody's on their own journey and doing their own thing. But I just think there's so much untapped potential. And my kind of biggest driver for me for why I do what I do and why I want to help people is I don't want people to get to 55 and be working in a job that they hate and think, I've just pissed away the past 25 years and I'm not really happy with where I am, and I wish I'd done this, I wish I'd tried that, I wish I had gone out on my own, or I wish I had retrained. Because I think a lot of the time we stop ourselves from doing that because we're worried about, oh, well, if I retrain, then I'm going to lose 2 years. But what's 2 years in a 40, 50-year career? And I think that having happiness at work, I don't know if it's a human right, that But I think it's something that we all deserve. But we have to take responsibility for creating that happiness ourselves. We can't expect it to be given to us. And unfortunately, that does mean putting yourself out there, hard work, often all of those types of things. So yeah, a little bit of that, I think.
And I think there's something, I mean, you say, you know, calling it human right is a bit strongly, but it always surprises me that the number of people who would say they actively enjoy their job is very much a minority. And the conversations that, you know, I've been party to where someone's gone, yeah, I really enjoy my job. Everyone else is kind of like, oh, you're so lucky. You know, while it shouldn't necessarily be like in the Geneva Convention, I do wonder whether actually we could strive for more people to not actively dislike what they do for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week at the bare minimum. And actually people who enjoy their jobs are more productive and work harder and deliver more. So it feels like a win-win.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what you realize is that everybody's good and enjoys different things. So what floats your boat might not float mine and might not float somebody else's. But there's probably enough of us that like different aspects of all of the different jobs that there are, that if we just find the thing that lights our fire, we're putting our strengths and our values and our passions in the right place, that there's kind of like enough to go round almost.
Yeah. I think as well, there's something that I was starting to appreciate towards the end of my corporate time in corporate, where for many years I felt like there was a sort of sense that with performance development and, you know, appraisals and that whole cycle and so on, that it was a case of identifying your gaps and then working on those gaps so that you could, and it was like the job was to make everybody a completely rounded person who was good at everything. And as a result, for many years, I always had development areas around attention to detail and project management because I'm a bad project manager. And after a while, I kind of like, I don't think I'm ever going to be good at it. And I'm not really interested in being good at it. That's not to say that, you know, if you want to be good at something, you should just accept that, you know, you're not naturally good and you couldn't, you know, that's the whole fixed mindset thing, you know. If you want to be good at something, then practice, great. But if you're not that interested in it and you're not good at it, then maybe concentrate on your strengths and just like buddy up with someone who fills that gap.
Or find a new job that plays to your strengths and doesn't expose your weaknesses. So I completely agree with you. And when I was in the marketing role at Deliveroo, they wanted me to be good at analytics and Excel. It's just not my bag. I wasn't getting to use half of the strengths that I had around facilitation and public speaking and emotional intelligence and leadership and coaching and all of the things that I get to do now. I was in the wrong job. So I think finding a job that aligns to your strengths being not just what you're good at, but also what motivates you, what energizes you, what you enjoy, is going to make you more productive, happier, and is going to give more to the company as well, because you're kind of firing on all cylinders, as opposed to, oh God, I really don't want to have to stick my head in that Excel spreadsheet again.
Yeah, absolutely 100%.
Make your spike spikier, I say.
Yeah. So Alice, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for that. Where can people find you?
So the best place to find me is probably on my Instagram, just because that's where I share the kind of warts and all story, and I post fairly regularly. So that's at Badass Unicorn Co. I'm also on LinkedIn, Alice Ter Haar, and then my website is www.badassunicorn.co.uk.
Lovely. Thank you for being on Do Yourself a Favour, and thank you for listening. We will see you again soon. You've been listening to Do Yourself a Favour, the podcast about learning from experience and the things we do to make our lives easier. Brought to you by Make Work Work Better. My name's Tim Sisney from Make Work Work Better. Our theme tune is by the Titanics. Talk to you again soon.